when she was at school. And really, again, here there are there is a lot, in fact, a lot of drama and really lovely questions that if you like, invoked in a very nice way here. Now, again, there are a lot of symbolism here in the stories. For example, here, the land of red apples. The land of red apples. There were 8 in our party of bronzed children who were going east with the missionaries. Among us were 3 young braves who told girls, and we 3 little ones, Gertrude, Thuween, and I. Now, of course, remember the whole story. All these stories are narrated by the first-person narrator. The first-person narrator and character. So here, the character herself is the narrator, and the narrator indirectly is the implied author, or the writer herself. In a way, it's a reflection on all those kids and all those children, native people at that time, how the natives were treated. Now, look at the question here, the missionaries. Again, I think this is important because they treated all these people in the name of Christianity and in the name of God and in the name of religion. They treated these people in a very ugly way. In the same way, we can see how Africans also, are, for example, dominated in the name of religion. And really, this is funny and unbelievable and amazing and horrible, how religion is abused. And of course, here they use it to say, well, we are Christianizing you, we are helping you, we are teaching you, we are, etc. But of course, in the name of religion, there are a lot of ugly things going on. And really, this is the idea here. When always when you see things like this, there's always a tinge of irony. There's always really a tinge of irony here. When these people talk about God and religion, they say, well, in the name of God and religion, you are killing us. And I think it's really terrible and ugly to do that everywhere. I think to use religion in these contexts is absolutely irreligious, absolutely unreligious. Anyway, so here, when to say how these missionaries, the word missionaries, there's those people who acted as if they were Christians and they were helping these people to become religious. And here, the young lady here, our friend, the character, she calls, she tells us about this land of red apples. We had been very impatient to start on our journey to the red apple country. Again, later on, we shall see that the red apple country can be, again, maybe seen as symbolical here in many ways, which we were told lay a little beyond the great circular horizon of the western prairie. Under a sky of rosy apples, we dreamt of roaming as freely and happily as we had chased the cloud shadows on the Dakota plains. We had anticipated much pleasure from a ride on the iron horse, but the throngs of staring pale faces disturbed and troubled us. All the time you can see how she talks about the pale faces, meaning, of course, all those Yankees, those strange, ugly-looking white men, the way they came and took their land. Really here, the word red apple could symbolize, as we shall see, could symbolize all their country and all their nation. And here, the whole of Dakota Dakota today in the map, in the northern central parts of America, really is to some extent, well, could be the heart of the Indian community, maybe in modern time. So notice here, it said staring, pale faces. On the train, fair women with tottering babies on each arm stopped their haste and scrutinized the children of absent mothers. Large men with heavy bundles in their hands halted nearby and riveted their glassy blue eyes upon us. Again, look at how she describes them, glassy, as if to say the way they are, unlike the brownish colored, the bronze colored, if you like, Indians. So here to say the glassy, really she's mocking the way they look. On the train, again, okay, I sank deep into the corner of my seat, for I resented being watched. Here, this little girl, as I said, remember this is at school, this little girl describing how she wants to be independent and not to be watched. Directly in front of me, children who were no longer than I hung themselves upon the backs of their seats with their bold white faces toward me. Again, notice how she always describes these white people, again, in a really funny, ugly way. Sometimes they took their forefingers out of their mouth and pointed at my moccasined feet. Their mothers, instead of reproving such rude curiosity, looked closely at me and attracted their children's further notice on my blanket. This embarrassed me and kept me constantly on the verge of tears. Here, of course, you can see the contrast, how these white people, mothers and children, white people looking on them, meaning the Red Indians, maybe in sort of attractive way, but to her it was not attractive, because she said, I was embarrassed the way they stare at me and say, oh, what's this? I sat perfectly still with my eyes downcast. This is how she felt, that people were looking at her, and she felt really terrible. How people are, staring and looking, daring only now and then to shoot long glances around me, glancing to turn to the window at my side. I was quite breathless upon seeing one familiar object. It was the telegraph pole, which strode by at short paces, very near my mother's dwelling, along the edge of a road thickly bordered with wild sunflowers. Some poles like these had been planted by white men. Often I had stopped on my way down the road to hold my ear against the pole, and hearing its slow moaning, I used to wonder what the pale face had done to hurt it. Now I sat watching for each pole that glided by to be the last one. It's really amazing here how this little girl describing these poles, these, like this electricity or telephone or telecommunication poles, or like these, masts, or these, whatever they use this to connect places, really. In those days, they put them on poles instead of put them under the earth. And she's looking at these poles. They are made of wood, and she feels that this wood was cut down from the forest and being put here, and you know, as if to say that I feel for these Poles, that they were stolen and taken away from our forests, from our land, and they were killed by the white man to be put here like Poles. And I think, you know, the way she talks and listens and, you know, imagines things about the Pole is very strange. People, you know, could be amazed by what she's saying here. Yeah, let me see this electricity thing. Since I'm talking about electricity, my machine needs to be connected. Yeah. Notice, in this way, I had forgotten my uncomfortable surrounding. When I heard one of my comrades call on my name, I saw the missionary standing very near, tossing candies and guns into our midst. This amused us all, and we tried to see who could catch the most of the sweetmeats. You know, here, for example, you can see maybe these missionary women were treating them like, you know, their teachers, and they are treating them in a way like being their children. To some extent here, there is a little bit of really positive description of that. Though we rode several days inside the iron horse, I don't recall a single thing about our luncheons. You know, the way she describes the bus as our iron horse, really this is a lovely image to say here. Iron horse, meaning the bus. You know, she calls here the bus as an iron horse. You know, this is really a lovely description. She said, you know, the way we were driven into these buses is amazing. She said, I'm not going to tell you about our food, but maybe she will, about our luncheons. It was right when we reached the school grounds. The lights from the windows of the large buildings fell upon some of the icicle trees that stood beneath them. We were led toward an open door where the brightness of the lights within flooded out over the heads of the excited pale faces who looked our way. My body trembled more from fear than from the snow I trod upon. You can see here how much she's terrified. She's really unhappy about this, how these white men, how these white people stare at her and at them. And, you know, in a way, as I said, this is the idea about being watched. You know, the whole thing, you can see really the simplicity and the naive way of, you know, saying all this in an interesting fashion. Okay, so yeah, you can see really this all in a nice way how when she said, my body trembled more. You know, she is very angry that people, white men, if you like, or just any white, or as she calls them, pale faces. As I said, the name always, when she uses the word pale face, she's really very ironical and she hates them. Entering the house, I stood close against the wall. The strong glaring light in the large whitewashed room dazzled my eyes. The noisy hurrying of hard shoes upon a bare wooden floor increased the whirring in my ears. My only safety seemed to be in keeping next to the wall. As I was wondering in which direction to escape from all this confusion, two warm hands grasped me firmly, and in the same moment I was tossed high in midair. A rosy-cheeked, pale-faced woman caught me in the arms. I was both frightened and insulted by such trifling. I stared into her eyes, wishing her to let me stand on my own feet, but she jumped me up and down, increasing enthusiasm. My mother had never made a plaything of her wee daughter. Remembering this, I began to cry aloud. You know, as you can see, the description and the really simple, naive way she's saying, the way they treat me, I don't like it. I'm not happy, I'm not comfortable with the way they treat me, and throwing me like a baby in the air, which is really very wrong to do sometimes. Very wrong to throw your baby up in the air and catch them down. It's very dangerous. Never do that, because it could be damaging and killing your baby. They misunderstood the cause of my tears and placed me at a white table loaded with food. There, our party were united again. As I did not hush my crying, one of the other ones whispered to me, "Wait until you are alone in the night." It was very little I could swallow besides my sobs that evening. "Oh, I want my mother and my mother Dawi. I want to go to my aunt," I pleaded, but the ears of the pale faces could not hear me. From the table, we were taken along an upward incline of wooden boxes, which I learned afterward to call a stairway. At the top was a quiet hall, dimly lighted. Many narrow beds were in one straight line down the entire length of the wall. In them lay sleeping brown faces, which peeped just out of the coverings. I was tucked into bed with one of the tall girls because she talked to me in my mother tongue and seemed to soothe me. I had arrived in the wonderful land of rosy skies, but I was not happy, as I had thought I should be. My long travel and the bewildering sights had exhausted me. I fell asleep, heaving deep, tired sobs. My tears were left to dry themselves in streaks, because neither my aunt nor my mother was near to wipe them away. You know, these red apples, I don't know where are they, you know? And when she said the land of the land of red apples, as I said, it's really the symbolism here could be, which is, you know, the school. Is it the schooling? Is the school seen here as lovely and, you know, beautiful, etc., etc.? Is that the case? We don't know really. We are not sure here. But really, as I said, the symbolism, of course, and the idea how this young lady is telling us the story how she was treated in the first day of schooling. And of course, you know, in schools, especially to these kids, you know, it's very strange and very weird. Of course, they are not used to such a life, to live in a group of people and to be disciplined and to be punished and to be treated and to be, you know, part of a community which is not your community. I mean, the teachers and everybody else, the missionaries, the teachers, and so on, they are not really, you know, Indians, of course. They were all white, as she calls them, pale faces. So it's very hard for her to really appreciate or even to try to understand or maybe later on, only maybe later on, she appreciated, or maybe she understood what was going on. But originally, the whole thing for her was a terrible, tragic situation. And I think sometimes, you know, experience of going your first day of schooling, you know, is sometimes everlasting, really everlasting. Sometimes you don't forget. I remember I remember myself really the first time we went into the class, myself. Yeah. And when you get sometimes, I think sometimes these memories will never go. Your experience, or the first day of schooling, or the next day, or the first day, or the first week, or the first year at least, sometimes people, these memories will never go. They will never go, because they are the first memories, and they impress you really hard. And here really it shows how much, you know, that effect was on her. On the speaker here, this red Indian young lady, in a really very lovely fashion indeed. Now, the next story is even more dramatic. You know, she said the way they cut her hair, the cutting of my long hair. You know, this is the next story. You know, it's an amazing, really lovely story. I will read it quickly with you as well. Again, this is really very tragic, and she was very terrified and unhappy that people cut her hair. And Red Indians cutting hair, or cutting your hair in the Red Indian culture, is like a terrible punishment, is really like a terrible dehumanizing element. It's like, you know, absolutely even demonizing element. So here she's telling us about how they cut her hair and how much she was terrified and frightened and angry. The first day in the land of apples was a bitter cold one. You know, this is what you called here the land of apples, meaning the school, really. Supposed to be the school. And in this area where this school is, in the mountain, in a lovely area. And again, the symbolism about the apples, the red apples. And here, of course, she means the first day in the school. For the snow still covered the ground, and the trees were bare. A large bell rang for breakfast. It was metallic voice crashing through the belfry overhead and into our sensitive ears. The annoying clatter of shoes, on bare floors gave us no peace. The constant clash of harsh noises with an undercurrent of many voices murmuring and unknown tongues made a bedlam within which I was securely tied. And though my spirit tore itself in struggling for its lost freedom, all was useless. Again, as I said, look at the way she describes this, you know, the lovely image there, the romantic image, the snow covering the whole ground, and the contrast, you know, the trees and the bare trees, and, you know, the way even the noise, the bells, the noise of the people walking, and the shoes, she said, like the clatter of the shoes annoying her. Look at this contrast, you know, the images of annoyance and the images of peace, you know, to do with the snow and nature and trees. And, you know, this is really an amazing romantic thing. That's what I say and what I mean by that these stories have a lot of romantic elements about them. But of course, as I say, in contrast to the meanings of domination. A pale-faced woman with white hair came up after us. Again, notice the way she describes her, always, you know, she will never forget to say pale face and white face and ugly face. You know, this idea is always interesting for her. We were placed in a line of girls who were marching into the dining room. These were Indian girls in stiff shoes and closely clinging dresses. You know, describing all these, you know, groups and many Indian girls, she said. The small girls wore sleeves, aprons, and shingled hair. As I walked noiselessly in my soft moccasins, I felt like sinking into the floor, for my blanket had been stripped from my shoulders. I looked hard at the Indian girls, who seemed not to care that they were even more immodestly dressed than I, in their tightly fitting clothes. While we marched in, the boys entered at an opposite door. I watched for the three young braves who came in our party. I spied them in the rear ranks, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. A small bell was tapped, and each of the pupils drew a chair from under the table. Supposing this act meant they were to be seated, I pulled out mine and at once slipped into it from one side. But when I turned my head, I saw that I was the only one seated, and all the rest at our table remained standing. Just as I began to rise, looking shyly around to see how chairs were to be used, a second bell was sounded. All were seated at last, and I had to crawl back into my chair again. I heard a man's voice at one end of the hall, and I looked around to see him, but all the others hung their heads over their plates. As I glanced at the long chain of tables, I caught the eyes of a pale-faced woman upon me. Immediately, I dropped my eyes, wondering why I was so keenly watched by the strange woman. The man ceased his mutterings, and then a third bell was tapped. Everyone picked up his knife and fork and began eating. I began crying instead, for by this time I was afraid to venture anything more. But this eating by formula was not the hardest trial in that first day. Late in the morning, my friend Gertrude gave me a terrible warning. Gertrude knew a few words of English, and she had overheard the pale-faced woman talk about cutting out long, heavy hair. Our mothers had taught us that only unskilled warriors who were captured had their hair shingled by the enemy. Among our people, short hair was worn by mourners and shingled hair by cowards. You see, so this is the image about cutting your hair, what it means really. And of course, she feels terrible, even those who get their hairs, shortened or shingled. We discussed our fate some moments, and when Gertrude said, "We have to submit because they are strong," I rebelled. "No, I will not submit. I will struggle first," I answered. Yeah. I think this is a very good idea. Don't submit. Don't submit. Do not submit. لا تستسلم. لا تستسلم. That's what she's saying. No, I will not submit. I will struggle first. Yeah, I will try to stop them. I will struggle. I will try my way, but I'm not going to give them my head. I will not submit. I watched my chance, and when no one noticed, I disappeared. You know, she ran away, thinking that she could run away from being her hair cut. I crept up the stairs as quietly as I could in my squeaking shoes. My moccasins had been exchanged for shoes. Along the hall I passed without knowing whether I was going. Turning aside to an open door, I found a large room with 3 wide beds in it. The windows were covered with dark green curtains, which made the room very dim. Thankful that no one was there, I directed my steps toward the corner farthest from the door. On my hands and knees, I crawled under the bed and cuddled myself in the dark corner. Yeah, I mean, this young lady here is trying to say, I'm not going to let you cut my hair. You know, she's trying here, as she said, I will struggle. I will struggle first. I will not submit. From my hiding place, I peered out, shuddering with fear whenever I heard footsteps nearby. Though in the hall, loud voices were calling my name, and I knew that even Gertrude was searching for me, I did not open my mouth to answer. Then the steps were quickened and the voices became excited. The sounds came nearer and nearer. Women and girls entered the room. I held my breath and watched them open closet doors and peep behind large trunks. Someone threw up the curtains and the room was filled with sudden light. What caused them to stoop and look under the bed, I don't know. I remember being dragged out, though I resisted by kicking and scratching wildly. In spite of myself, I was carried downstairs and tied fast in a chair. I cried aloud. I cried aloud, shaking my head all the while until I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck, and I heard them gnaw off one of my thick braids. Then I lost my spirit. Since the day I was taken from my mother, I had suffered extreme indignities. Extreme indignities. People had stared at me. I had been tossed about in the air like a wooden puppet, and now my long hair was shingled like a coward's. In my anguish, I moaned for my mother, but no one came to comfort me. Not a soul reasoned quietly with me, as my own mother used to do. For now I was only one of many little animals driven by a herder. Yeah. Yeah. Any comments? What do you think? Really, this is a lovely story, amazing story about, you know, this child's experience And of course, the whole idea about the treatment, the bad treatment, well, to her, it's the very bad treatment. It's her own point of view, her own childish, maybe, point of view, which is to her, this was something terrible. But for the missionaries and the school and the system and the pale faces and the white faces, if you like, this was the norm. This was the norm, the normal thing, because these people are supposed to take education and to understand and to accept it as it is. Of course, as I said to you, really the narrative here is to show us the story from her side, what the whole thing meant to her, from her side, from her own native Red Indian side, which is different from the white man's side. Okay, I think there are a lot of things to talk about here and to think and to discuss, but really I will leave it for you to study yourself, to self-study and to analyze it on your own. Please do that yourselves, so you can get the idea exactly as it is meant to be here.